I think we're on.
We're live.
Awesome. There we are. Hi, everybody. I'm Ed, the Bard.
And I'm the Game Mechanic.
And we're here live from Game Citadel in Bangor, Maine, also known as Winterfell, to bring you a charming little tale about flavor and mechanics. So I might as well just launch into this thing. Okay, so RPG Brigade got us together to put this little thing together.
Discuss game mastering techniques and how they impact your stories.
Because we did a little blog. You did a little blog.
I did a blog that pissed everyone off,
And
especially the first edition folks.
And I did a blog that made everyone feel happy.
He did. It was great.
So basically, in this case, you're Satan.
I am the ass.
And I can vouch for that because I have seen you eat live babies.
I mean, I'm not saying I eat babies, but I might eat babies.
Babies. So let's just launch into this thing. We're going to discuss flavor in RPGs, their implications, how much is too much, does one trump the other, and all that good stuff. So, question number one. How extremes of either flavor or crunchy rulesiness can be equally harmful to a game? Mr. Mechanic?
I think that in either case, whenever one unnecessarily impacts the other, you have a loss of enjoyment in the game, which is really what we're looking for here. So if the game is too crunchy, then you give rise to game rules lawyers. You have to stop and look up the rules. You have to waste time with this extremely crunchy game system. And if your game master breaks the rule system to influence the game with his own flavor ideals, then what will happen is you kind of lose a sense of agency as a player, or your players lose their sense of agency. And as it's been discussed often, your players are your biggest resources in your story. They're all storytellers at the table. So I think kind of violating that social contract to silence them at points, it can be problematic.
But on the other hand, you do have abuses of each system. If it's too crunchy, somebody's going to find a loophole and make something like a pun. And nobody wants a pun.
I mean, somebody wants a pun.
Somebody wants a pun. Or you could have the swashbuckling rogue that was a pirate captain and a king and a nobleman, and he's a half dragon, but he's got like 8 for all of his stats. Flavor can go only so far, and then you start treading into it's not really a believable character anymore. Which I think that's a decent segue into should a player be allowed to add every flavor to a character?
I think there's definitely a place for any sort of game master who's flexible. Some game masters can't be flexible, and they can't deal with that creativity. For example, I heard of a game master who didn't want to implement monks into their game because monasteries weren't a thing. But of course, intellectually, we can always say the like chicken and the egg scenario, where monks arose before monasteries came thereafter. So I think there's always a reasonable way to introduce whatever a player wants into your story and your campaign.
I don't like limiting my players. I'll put that right out there. I like giving them just about every option. But there are some settings where some things aren't really called for. If you're running a hardcore medieval setting and somebody shows up wielding all kinds of crazy kung fu, those two things don't really mesh that well. And as flavorful as the backstory could be, where they were put in a slave ship and taken halfway across the world, landed up stranger in a strange land, the whole point is they probably shouldn't have made the character to begin with.
I think that's an interesting example in that, as you've discussed in your blog, because I do my research, reskinning's a thing. So if they want to play a kung fu type character in a hardcore medieval, maybe they're just a fighting badass. Maybe they have no Chinese influence or Japanese influence, or even what we think of as a traditional monk. People have fought since the beginning of time, and even Europe has their martial arts systems.
So just a wandering, brawling badass.
That could be a thing.
I could deal with that. Fun story. One of the examples you used in your blog about this was somebody wants to make a hardcore Dark Ages setting. Nobody cares about that.
I was using hyperbole.
I know.
Some people do.
I sort of cared, but I really didn't care because I had a really bad experience with the Vampires Dark Ages game.
Yeah.
And yeah, we had to hide the Antichrist. It didn't work out so good. So I guess, do you think that every class should be on the table?
For the most part, I can't think of a reason not to in any well-balanced system.
Gunslinger.
That's a great counterexample. So that's difficult. What setting are you trying to set this gunslinger in?
Let's go 5th edition D&D.
5th edition D&D.
Faerun.
Faerun. So like magic
High magic.
High magic. Well, technology has always been described as any sufficiently advanced technology can be explained as magic. So maybe Faerun doesn't have a futuristic setting like Pathfinder does. So these aren't found things from age-long past but you could reskin the pistols or whatever firearm they're using into a magical item. And I think this is reflected quite nicely in the price ranges of firearms in the Pathfinder setting, which I realize isn't 5th. But I think that's where they got their influence for the gunslinger. They reskinned it from Pathfinder.
Oh, it transfers over pretty well. So now that Pathfinder has Starfinder coming out, and both games are compatible because it's the same universe.
Yep.
And you start seeing folks wanting to play some of these futuristic sci-fi classes. But if they're not playing in Galorian, Pathfinder home setting, and they're just playing in a homebrew world, you have these highly advanced, technologically advanced civilizations coming down to friggin' Camelot. At some point, is that going to break the game?
I mean, I can't account for every rule or everything. I think that it has the potential to break the game if you're not wary and you're not reskinning things properly. Because a lot of times what a player's after is like the gunslinger, the example from before, he has grit points where he gets to do fucking cool things, excuse my French, with grit. And that's cool mechanics. They fall in love with how this thing works. So could a gunslinger break a game in a medieval setting that was like, say, no magic? I don't think it could break the game. It could change the flavor of the game. And I think, again, everyone's a storyteller at the table. When you've got to try to negotiate a story that you all can tell at the same time. In your example, Starfinder and like a medieval setting, I don't know all the rules, but I can't think of a place where I couldn't be from a futuristic society and tossed to the earth and trying to get home because I can't communicate, or flung back in time. Or there's so many great literary examples where these sorts of setups have worked. Or maybe even I have a futuristic gun, but it works twice.
Oh, the Pirates of the Caribbean, you've only got one bullet and it's meant for one guy.
Right.
Yeah.
This battery pack, it only has 2% charge.
And at that point, you got a nice storytelling element right there. Flavorful character elements. That's what we love. Nice. You want to toss the next one out there, boss?
All right. So it says, so we're on this one or this one?
Oh, either one.
Okay. What are some techniques, scenes, anecdotes to add to character backstory flavor during the game?
Oh, I love flashbacks. You can create an entire session, a one-off, that's just a flashback. And it doesn't even need to be for a character. You could do this for a setting. If you guys are in an abandoned mine exploring and the place is overrun by goblins, you could do an aside where you have the group play first-level dwarves, miners that worked in that mine when it was overrun by the goblins. And then you could arrange it so the outcome of that one-off tells the rest of the story for the dungeon. I like that kind of stuff. I like cutscenes from my bad guys. I like the players to know what's coming, sort of like a TV show. I like to write my games like a TV season. So you have the beginning, a bunch of standalone stuff. Then you get into sweeps week. Things get really interesting. You have some kind of culmination, back to a few one-offs, and then big finish and a cliffhanger. It's worked really well because it mixes things up and it keeps things interesting. As for doing that with a character backstory during a game, I've explored character backstories before. I've had you actually played in one of those games where there was a druid in the party, and she worshipped a carnivorous, man-eating tree that was also a great old one. So the tree asks for sacrifices. The druids bring the sacrifices to the tree. It doesn't work out well for anyone, and these guys had to go and investigate and stop it.
Druid murdering a tree. First time.
Yep. And it was so cool. Aside from the fact that you guys raffle stomped that tree in like 3 rounds.
Well, it's mythic.
Yeah.
Mythic's meant to be broken. I think flashbacks can be used, but I like sidestepping this whole thing. And what do I mean by that? So oftentimes we've played games where either you or I, or you and I, where a player creates a backstory for a character that doesn't match up to how the character plays. Traveler.
I had a wood elf ranger, and he was this stoic badass wandering ranger who always wore a mask. And he was part of this order of wandering rangers that patrolled this wasteland, dotted with ruins and covered with monsters. And their job was to see people from one side to the other safely. So he's from this group of people. So I set him up to be insanely cool. Session 1, I get mauled. And this is the very first thing that happens in the game. I'm mauled by a monster, and I'm bleeding out. And the half-orc in the party finds me and takes me to the nearest city to get some healing. I get healed up, life is good, and then a city crashes into the city because that happens, or should happen. From what happened next, I don't really remember because I kept getting knocked out so much.
All the time.
All the time. It got so bad that they started calling me the narcoleptic elf. Elves don't sleep, but I slept a lot.
Good. So to sidestep this sort of problem, I've come to the conclusion that I prefer games where you start off at a really low level. So 1 you'd say is really low level. In fact, it's the lowest level you can be. But you could start off as an NPC class. If you're starting off as Traveler, per se, you'd start off, this is the first week on the job. This is a thing that you're going to do. You want a story, like some background in there, but you want to set up things like family, friends. And then if you have a specific plan for your character, talk to the game master. Be like, I would really like for him to lose an arm or an eye or a family or a town. Fuck it, burn everything down.
I'm usually that guy. I need to suffer. I don't know what it is. I think I have a martyr complex, but I want everything stripped away from me so I can just crawl into a ball and die.
So now you might be saying, well, Billy, that's no different, or game mechanic. That's no different than having a backstory. But it really is, because then the other players appreciate when you say, I have to avenge my family, because your family died in front of them. And a good game master would have that family be delightful people. So the players like the family. Then you murder them. Then everybody has to avenge your family.
I've been a big proponent since day one of introduce an NPC that everyone loves. Make that NPC valuable, and then kill the hell out of that NPC. It motivates people, and it's a story point, and a lot of people are like, that's just a useless waste of time. That's just playing with the player's emotions. And yes, it is. That's what you do. As a game master, you want them to be so emotionally vested in your game that they need to hate whoever killed Sonia, the barmaid. The son of a bitch that killed her needs to die now. And they will move heaven and earth to kill that guy. And that's a great way to start up villains. So yeah, I'm a big fan of flavor and backstories. I agree with what you're saying, though, about getting everyone involved with that backstory, because it does create a new emotional layer for the storytelling. If you can see where this person came from, you can understand what they're going through. That's why a lot of times when I start a game at a low level, a lot of folks know each other. They're from the same place. They know the same people. So if something happens to that place, like a rampaging orc horde or a dragon attacks, they have a stake. And they're going to want to save people unless they hate the place. And then you have another emotional thing where these people, these characters hated their home so much that they ran, not bothering to save anyone while they burned. So it creates a whole different kind of player character right there.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a good way to do it. I do think that again, the only trap, and this goes back to extremes that some game masters fall into, is like, well, everyone has to know each other and be great friends. I don't think that's a good hook to lay on the players. I think it's good that there has to be a relationship built before this thing happens. So maybe I'm a wanderer from another town. I come into town, some thugs start to beat the shit out of me, and these people are like, hey, stop that. All of a sudden, we're good friends because I don't like getting the shit beat out of me. I don't know about you, but I don't. So we're good friends, and that's all that matters.
I mean, some people pay good money for that kind of thing.
I mean, you have to pay extra.
Yeah.
But the point being is there's more than one way to skin a cat. I've never skinned a cat, but I'm told there's more than one way.
And now we've got PETA on us. Great.
Yes.
Narrated. I can't even talk today. You hit it up, Billy.
Narrativism, simulationism, gamism. Which of these are your favored creative agendas? How do you balance these with player preferences? For the most part, I toss simulationism right the fuck out the window.
Not a big fan?
Sorry, the language. But real life sucks. I don't know if you've experienced this, but have you ever gotten hurt? Like broken something?
No, not really.
Like gotten cut?
Nope.
Those things all suck. You know, it'd be great if someone would lay some magic right down on me and I never had to deal with that. That would be great. But instead, when I get hurt, I have to deal with it. Bills? Fucking hate bills. Do I want my character to have bills? No. Should he? Probably. Fuck that noise.
I see you feel passionately about simulationism.
Yeah, it's just if I wanted real life, I'd go do real life. And for the 4 hours that I'm game mastering, and like for the 1 or 2 hours that I prep, I am in the game. That's what I prefer to do. If I wanted real life, I'd go do fucking real life.
So what about resource management? How much weight you carrying in your pack? How much ammo you got on you?
Okay. So like that can be a neat little sub game, and it depends on your players and your game master, of course, because even though all the players are storytellers, the game master is too. But resource management can vary from a fun little sub game where you're the mage, can't carry a bunch of stuff, but you got spells to carry stuff, to a game where you're like, dear God, I don't care anymore. I cared about the game, but I don't anymore because I have to worry about everything that I pick up. I had to travel 3 months out into the wastes so that when I reach this ruin, get the treasure, then I have to decide which treasure I keep. And what if I don't make my appraise rolls? I have no fucking idea what stuff's worth except gold coins. But then I get back and I find out the gold coins aren't worth shit because my DM hates me. Anyways.
Wow.
Anyways. But then again, these elements can tell a story. I don't think they add to flavor or anything else. But in the beginning of the game, like for the first quarter, let's say if you played a level 20, I'm not a big advocate of 1 to 20 games. I think we've had bad experiences with that. You, me, other people, because the games tend to get broken towards the upper levels. And it's hard to deal with as a game master. It's hard to deal with as a player. But for the sake of argument, let's say 1 to 20. So 1 through 5 should be dealing with some of this shit, like carrying capacity, like bills, like paying money and stuff. Because then at the end of the game or the middle of the game or when you're starting to come into your own, you appreciate that. Like I used to have to go out and scavenge every day for food, and it was usually garbage. And now I'm eating cake with the king. That's pretty great.
I think that you can throw a decent amount of flavor into resource management. Lord of the Rings. I will invoke the Holy Trilogy. When they leave Galadriel's realm, they're given elvish flatbread, lammis bread, which fills a man's stomach with 1 bite. So, 3 loaves for a hobbit, but that's some neat flavor that kind of overrides the regular rules. We know that trail rations are about 1 pound per day. Always has been, usually will be. But lammis bread, it's supposed to be light.
What, does it break the rules, or is it just a new magic item?
See, magic, the ultimate rule breaker.
But if used properly, you can take and just sprinkle in a little simulationism, if that's your bag, and then you can lay some magic on top of it like a cake. This is frosting. That's the great part. No one likes the dry cake. You put the magic on top, and then it's delicious again. So you're like, oh yeah, no, you're carrying capacity. Heward's handy haversack. Suck it, simulationism.
Nice. So at least we know that the game mechanic is not a big fan of simulationism. What about gameism?
Gameism? Well, we're playing a game, so it should feel like a game. You should have the opportunity to be a little silly, to do the things you want to do, and try to beat the game. I was given some flack over saying if a player beats you, it's real easy to mess up that sort of that speaking. And that the game master is always setting these things in front of the players for them to beat. So if the player beats you in an encounter in an unexpected way, it was what I meant. But so it should feel gamey because it's a game.
So a lot of rules to get things going. Play by the rules because we know how people like to cheat Monopoly.
Yes.
Everyone wants to be the banker. No one wants to give out the loans.
I don't think, though, that necessarily it has to have a lot of rules. Pathfinder's great environment to play games, it has a lot of rules. It's got stats for everything.
It is a very crunchy system.
And now you're going to have stats for everything in space.
In space.
But anyways, that's a fun system, and I've played it a lot, mostly. I've also played Cortex, which has very few rules. You just build a dice pool, roll, add up 2 dice. Yeah, that's your total, and then another dice is your effect die. And so simpler systems have a place, but there's this sort of balance. It's hard to strike, and it's going to be different from player to player and group to group. But I do believe stick to the rules. Or if you're going to change the rules, then change them in a way that everyone can agree on and that enhances the game. Don't change them just because you feel like it.
Are you a big fan of house rules?
I can be. It depends on the house rule. Sometimes, for example, I decide that it just doesn't make sense that you can use shadow magic during the day. So I rule that during the day in my games, you can't use shadow magic. That's a dick move. It's called stymieing the players. It's called out specifically in the Dungeon Master Guide in Pathfinder, which is a great resource for dungeon mastering or game mastering in all systems.
Game Mastery Guide might be one of the greatest books ever published.
Oh, my bad. Wrong name, but yes.
I forgive you. I don't. I'm a big fan of narrativism. That's my bread and butter. The story is paramount. From start to finish, the entire point of the game is to tell the story. So if someone can offer me something story-wise that overrides something in a rule setting, I'm more likely to go with the story element. Let's say the cleric is completely out of spells, and the fighter's down. Things are looking grim. If the fighter doesn't get back up, things are going to go bad. Probably looking at a complete party wipe. I have no problem with him invoking his god and burning off some kind of trade-off, hit points, stat drop, to invoke some divine energy and put that fighter back on his feet to finish off the fight.
So, and that's an interesting point. Those things can make for very good story elements in your games. And I don't ever necessarily suggest against doing that. In my blog, I said indulge it a couple of times. So is this thing a miracle? Is it something that you'd only do once? Or is it something that would like show up over and over in your games after he claimed it by saying it once? These are the sort of questions you got to ask. If you create this rule because someone has a cool reason for it, all of a sudden you've created a weird way in which it interacts. So all of a sudden now the cleric can use hit points for spells, and that seems to be a fairly powerful mechanic most times, you know. So maybe I'd let it go a couple times. I'd remind the players that like this isn't how it works, but I love that story element. So you get a bank error, your favor. This turns out how you want it to turn out.
Nice. All right. How do you balance with player preferences?
A lot of times, again, like I've said, it's dealing with like reskinning and tweaking and talking with the character or the player rather. So I want to play a wandering person. Like, what are your motivations? Do you have a background? Why don't you have a background? Do you know what you're doing? What's going on here? Why are you wandering? Like, I can kind of use these questions to key the person into the campaign and change the campaign enough or reskin it or do different things. So there's a nice clean fit, like a dovetail.
Yeah.
Carpentry.
Oh.
Dovetail.
Oh.
Yeah.
Nice. Oh, we're breaking out the woodwork.
Yeah.
So
many hats.
one example I like to use, it's a rule, a system of rules that I absolutely despise. I wrote a blog about it a long time ago, 5 months ago, and I hate magic item creation. I hate it. Hate the idea of the way it's delivered in most books. Most books. I have X amount of gold. I'm going to turn that gold into a pretty magic item. Anyone that has this much gold can turn it into a pretty magic item. And I hate that because it makes the magic item a little less magical. It's not special now. It's just more expensive. The system that has been used to make magic items for years and years and years is faulty, I think. It's something you really can't quantify by a resource like money. By level, I can understand. A first level character shouldn't be running around with a Holy Avenger. It's gonna break the game. Nor do I feel that a second level character should get a deck of many things. No one should get a deck of many things, but everyone, unless it's a one shot, should get a deck of many things. Then they should have a deck of many things at least once. But the way that it's been presented in the past is completely void of any kind of story, any kind of flavor. And it just feels like you have this factory churning out uniform magic items. And then with a system like Pathfinder, you have feats that reduce the crafting time and reduce the amount of money you put in so you can make more magic items for your buck, which is great from an economic standpoint, but awful from a story standpoint. Unless that person is like some amazing crafter living like high in the mountains, making magic swords like it's his job, because it probably is. I feel that a magic item should be a reward, not something you can go to a shop and buy.
I'll have to disagree with that because there's so many magic items that are integral to character creation. We've all played that character that hinges around the one magic item. For example, if you want to play a monk type character that wisdom is really important to, you might want the amulet of mighty fists with the weapon special property that makes your wisdom do attack and damage on your attacks. That might be pivotal to your character. Maybe he's an old dude and it'd be practically unplayable without it. So then how do we deal with this itemization that's integral to the character design, playability, and interesting? Because no one wants to see an old man get beat. That's just not, I mean, some bum fights, but anyways, like you don't really want it to be that player. It becomes a painful experience. So I think there's much room for improvement in the magic item creation realm because, like you see, it's very blah. I think some of this can be handled through, I believe, lesser artifacts, things that can be created but aren't created under anymore, or things that the creation process really isn't understood. So yes, there's someone somewhere that can churn out magic swords, but you got to remember in even a high magic setting, there's not a lot of high level spellcasters. So there's going to be very few of these dudes. There's going to be fewer still that just like, you know what my job is? +1 flaming swords. Fucking but
flaming swords for the children, all
right. It's like the NRA, but with swords.
I support the open carry of swords.
Right.
I want that to be known.
Peacetime.
It's part of my platform.
Anyways, so like these people will exist, and they'll create lots of magic items. How you can handle this is if it feels blah to you, make the magic item blah. It's just a normal sword that cuts really well, and it lights on fire. That's cool. Now, if your player wants to create a magic item and they want to inject some flavor in it, maybe it's a flaming sword. Maybe they use a little crushed dragon scale. Now it does a bunch of cool things. Maybe it unlocks a new ability for them. Maybe once in a while you can have it do something wonky. Maybe it's intelligent. Maybe it has the intelligence of the dragon it slayed. There's all sorts of ways you can inject flavor without adversely affecting itemization.
Which I completely agree with, by the way. I like that little customization process with a magic item. Magic item should feel like your magic item. You hand someone a +1 sword, they have a magic sword. You hand them a sword that was wrenched from the hand of a Goliath, that was undead, and that sword has felled like 100 kings, and now it's in your hands and you're using it for good instead of awesome. That's your sword now.
Also, I do think there's room for a second avenue of magic item creation, which I have been a fan of, is that a weapon, especially a weapon, once it's used by a badass long enough, some of that badass gets into the sword, and all of a sudden it's a +1 sword of badassery. So not every sword or magic item in your world has to be created forged by a nerdy dude that studies books all day. Some of them can be created on the fly.
So a merit-based system.
Right. And for most of the time, like you mechanically, you kind of create this overlay, like maybe they have to spend extra money on it, or a lot of times this happens in the background. So evil dude McEvilton has or good guy McGoodington, I like that one better, has used this sword to kill so many demons. It's been covered in demon blood so many times.
Unsanitary.
And all of a sudden, this normal sword, silver sword, or whatever type of sword it needs to kill these demons, becomes +1 sword of demon killing. So that's a possibility too.
I like it. All right, game mechanic. Here's a question for you. Do you like third-party supplements?
Oh, some I do. Super Genius Guides and Loot for Less, I suggest it.
He's not being paid for that either. He really loves Loot for Less.
I don't get paid for anything.
I know, right?
I just hope people listen to what I have to say. That's my reward.
The Loot for Less is a fantastic system. It gives you a partial magic item, which is so neat. It's not an overpowering magic item. What was your favorite one?
There's a bunch of them. There's the half enchantments on magic swords. That will be like neat little things. I can't remember all of them off the top, but one of them is Spell Forged, which is a half plus to a sword, which just means it's a sword that can have a magic ability, but just one. So your flaming sword, you can just have a flaming sword. It doesn't have to be a +1 flaming sword. You might be like, game mechanic, that's stupid. Except at low levels, it's not stupid at all.
Nope.
You can't afford the +1 flaming sword, but maybe you want a flaming sword because you're a pirate, and that's full of flavor.
Maybe you want a keen sword. Maybe you want a really, really sharp sword that cuts things real good. So you throw keen on.
Right, and it's filled with lots of examples like this. There's rings that give a bonus to a skill, which is very handy, and they're cheap because a +1 bonus to not a random skill, but a chosen skill, that's pretty useful for a low-level character. And so I've fallen in love with that. However, some other third parties, they offer rules that break the game in different and weird ways. Lots of times you'll spot this when it says usable once per day. Usable once per day means that the fighter is going to use it once a day, then go back to the inn, and then fight again tomorrow. So it's usable every time.
So really you start having a 15-minute adventuring day. We go out, get into a fight, let's go back home. One thing I've noticed about a lot of third-party supplements is that they are overpowered. That once-a-day element, anything really off the D&D wiki from way back in the day. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. These weird, fun, crazy little classes that completely break the rules, they have some fun flavor to them, but how do you balance that out?
Well, oftentimes I'll sit down with the player and be like, what are you looking to do? Because that's what they care about. They don't care that they're playing a pyromancer out of the 3rd edition splat book, Fire and Things That Burn. They don't care about that. They care about being a pyromancer. So see, do you just want to burn stuff? Because I've got other rules for that. There's other ways to do what you want to do. And then maybe work on like an adaptation or an archetype in Pathfinder is a great way to put it. But we've been swapping out rules for classes forever. Like maybe someone hate scribe scroll. Get rid of that junk. Who says you have to have it? Not me. You're playing a different type of wizard, not the wizard that's in the book. But anyways, you got to sit down with your players and be like, what do you want to do? And if they're really stuck on this feed that's once a day, you got to do something to balance it. So you got to pull down that power level, or you've got to make it. And there's always a trade-off. So you pull down the power level, and then maybe they can use it more often. But if telling you right now, if it says usable once per day, it's probably broken. Don't do it. Especially if it comes from a third-party source.
A lot of third-party sources like to pump out stuff that isn't exactly what we would call balanced mechanically. Flavor-wise, I think it's entirely all flavor, and this is one of those times where I side on the mechanic side of things.
We don't always disagree.
No. Sometimes we're good buddies.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes he kills my character like
Sometimes.
4 times in a row.
Sometimes he's wrong.
Yeah. That hasn't happened yet, though. I like balance in a game. It's really important to me, which is why I've been really digging 5th edition, because the balance got moved back across the classes. The proficiency bonus is a great way of putting everyone on the same footing. Little class features here and there. This guy can do this thing really well. This guy can do that thing really well. But they can't do both. And I dig that, because it's a cooperative game, and you need everyone at that table to really accomplish anything major. But 3.5 was an excellent example of really imbalanced things. There are some classes that just shouldn't have been. For instance, the wizard. Now, I love the wizard. He's a classic. But back in 3.5 and still in Pathfinder, he's a Christ-punching devil machine. It's bad.
I will supplement this by saying that I don't think the wizard's broken per se. I think spellcasting in general. 3.5 Pathfinder. I haven't examined 5th edition very thoroughly. I heard that the spellcasting is better there, but I think they're all broken because of the way it's set up. The fighter doesn't run out of swords per day, but I run out of magic missiles. And usually the reason why at higher levels spellcasting is broken is in the background of these creators' minds, they figure at low levels spellcasting should suck, and lots of times it does. I prefer not to play a spellcaster under 5th level. I break that a lot if the campaign starts earlier. But a lot of times you're like, well, I did 3 things. I'm glad I'm useless now. That's mitigated a little bit by cantrips, not completely. 1d3 damage sucks. And then at the mid levels, you're like, okay, I'm coming into my own. And then like
About level 8, 9.
8, 9. 9th would be like 5th level spells. So yeah, maybe the bar's a little higher for me, like 6th level spells. About anywhere in there. The spells start getting ridiculous to the point where you're at friggin' 9th level spells, and I'll just warp reality because I have 25,000 gold, and I wish it to be so. So these sorts of things are problems with the spellcasting system, and it's been in every system so far. They have a hard time balancing these things. I'm working on a new system and a revision of the spellcasting system. But suffice to say, I think it's broken as all hell.
Oh, yes.
Also, I think this brought us to our next topic, which is our crunchy rule systems inherently more prone to abuse.
Oh, absolutely they are.
So, and here's my spin. You mentioned 5th. 5th is lighter than Pathfinder. I like Pathfinder. I also like the games I've played with 5th. However, 5th has a reward system called Inspiration, which can be great because you play by your backstory. You do something cool that the whole table likes, that the game master thinks is nifty because you're a folk hero from the forest of where to frig ever, and he gives you an inspiration point. That's a great system. However, if you've got a bad GM or a bad player or a bad whatever, maybe the player feels like he should get inspiration for doing the thing, or maybe the game master just isn't handing out inspiration enough. That can be a sort of abuse that goes on. I do think crunchy rule systems have problems. Every system has its problems. Sean K. Reynolds from Pathfinder wrote an excellent article. I'm sorry if I got the name wrong.
I think you're right.
He wrote the problem with discontinuities, in which he lists the ways that different games are broken in the context of like immunities for monsters like fire. Immunity for low-level monsters is ridiculous sometimes, because if they deal with a bigger entity that has fire immunity, then they just kind of sit and flail. Whereas you kind of think the bigger entity, the higher CR entity, should be able to beat up on the smaller entity, because that's how things work.
I think the example you like to use is the fire giant in the sun. Fire giant has fire immunity. If you put that son of a gun on the sun, he is going to be okay as far as the fire. I mean, the crushing mass and whatnot will end him quickly, but he could just hang out on a big flaming rock all day, or superheated gas, of plasma, whatever, and nothing bad happens to him because he's immune.
And that example comes from the article. Read it.
I do agree with that. I think immunity is something that should be earned, and instead of something that you just slap on. Fire elementals, I can see immunity. They are fire. But to burn a fire elemental with some kind of magical fire, badass.
Well, and he gives again, and I hate to give away too much of the article, but it's been out for a while, and if you haven't read it, you should have read it, so it's your problem. Anyways, he suggests that you replace fire immunity with 5 times the creature's CR and fire resistance, which would mean for normal folk, it's really hard to burn. But for fiery folk, not so hard to burn because I got lots of fire.
I have found that the really rules-heavy systems in the past have been really prone to breaking, because you have folks like brilliant gameologists. I remember those guys from way back when. They had great series back in 3.5 about how to create these amazing builds that would just destroy everything. You get some of that in Pathfinder with the Magus build, where you grab Dervish Dancer, you get a Scimitar, you throw 3 ranks and dance, and suddenly you're doing a lot more damage on your hits because you're using Dex for damage. This is Pathfinder, not 5th edition, where that's a thing now.
Well, and I think that with these builds, a lot of times the problem is the discontinuity. Why does dance have anything to do with this, first of all? Why does dancing make me better at fighting? I don't understand. Second of all, why is it a scimitar? And I can answer both of these, even though I just asked them like I didn't know. It's because it's a flavor thing. It comes out of some particular setting where these people danced with scimitars and they thought they'd add some flavor. And that breaks the game right there. But these crunchy systems, you got to watch out for the discontinuity. I feel like there is a balance, though, like I mentioned before, between crunchy systems breaking the game and freeform systems breaking the game. If we can look at two examples, let's look at LARPing. Like, we've all done it. I enjoyed it. But LARPing is subject to the same sort of problems that make-believe as a child is, because it's make-believe. And you're not a child. But anyways, so someone's like, I cast Fireball. Well, I'm immune to fire. I've got a ring of fire immunity. Well, I cast Sleep. Well, I don't sleep. I'm an elf. Well, I do this. Blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, I'm immune to all these things because there's no rule system to support it. And even in games like, again, like D&D 5th edition, the inspiration section can be abused or overlooked. That will greatly impact play. Now, if you look at a very crunchy system, let's go back to 3.5. There are definitely places where 3.5 is broken.
Oh,
There's
yes.
definitely places where Pathfinder is broken. And so you kind of got to mete out this sort of balance where players still understand that they have agency, that this is their story too. They have a way to meaningfully impact your story and your constructs that you're creating for them to experience. That should be your goal as a game master. You want them to interact with the story, not just listen to it. And between a system where there is absolutely no rules, like LARPing, because then that's prone to abuse too.
Do you think that players turn to these builds and really crunchy systems where they can abuse these things because they're not feeling empowered at the table?
Well, I think sometimes people just want to do more damage. Obviously, being the hero, I mean, that's why we play Pathfinder for the most part, D&D, RPG, tabletop RPGs. Generally, we're the hero. Sometimes we're the bad guy. I think you wrote a few blog articles about that. And that could be fun too, but we want to be badasses. Who wants to be the dude that doesn't do any damage? No one does. So then it's ultimately more appealing to do more damage instead of less damage, because some damage is good, more must be better. And power gaming in itself can pose a whole bunch of problems to both the party and the game master and the person himself, because all of a sudden there's no challenge anymore and it's not fun. And the people at the table are getting murderlated by sidekicks of these bad guys that you created for the power gamer to fight. And then you as the game master have to deal with you murderlating players.
And that's why I think the power gaming doesn't even work, because you up the stakes and the game master matches them, and you up them and the game master matches them. And at that point, why even put all the time and effort into making a superpowered character? Because you're just going to have it evened out against you.
So, and here's the rub with that. We both played under Ken Tompkins, great game master. And he had said to me, because in my early years, I was more of a rules lawyer and a power gamer because I had been abused by DMs. I use that term. It's probably not the correct term, but whatever. They would want to rip and tear everything that I created away for my character, away from me, as terms of to motivate me, which you said earlier can be a good way to motivate players. It is. It definitely is. I think it should be used sparingly. I think you think it should be used more than I think it should be used. That's a difference in game mastering styles, but that's neither here nor there. Anyways, talking to Ken Tompkins on the how to deal with a power gamer. And he said the problem is that most people who want to play a power gamer can play a power gamer, and that can work in a campaign completely fine. You think of someone like Orin from Final Fantasy. He's got his arm tucked up most of the time. He's not using it. He's got the badass sword. Most of the time, he's not using it, and it's the same sort of thing. I wanted to be a badass mythic magus that could do thousands of points of damage.
And you did.
And I did. But when did I use that ability?
Sparingly, after a while.
Yeah. At earlier levels, it's easier to abuse because I'm not doing retarded, ridiculous, ridiculous amounts of damage. That was my bad. Ridiculous amounts of damage. And it will create like these problems for everyone. So instead of doing like hundreds of damage, you're doing like an extra 10, which seems reasonable. At higher levels, that disparity grows and grows and grows. And so if you're dealing with a power gamer, I think that you need to talk to them. Listen, you're a badass. Everyone knows you're a badass. You want to be a badass, that's great. But you need to tone it down a notch for the other players and the other, because if you can kill everything in the dungeon, why are you palling around with these guys? If you're not palling around with these guys, you're not part of the story. You're an NPC. GTFO.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've had some power gamers under me. It didn't work out so well for the rest of the party. Worked out really well for the power gamer because I tried to strike that balance between not murdering everyone and keeping the power gamer somewhat challenged. And that's a hard bridge, especially as you keep going.
Well, and it's hard not to stymie a power gamer, which is another faux pas on the behalf of the game master. You want to be like, no, you can't do ridiculous amounts of damage. But, yeah, That's really, really hard to deal with. I think it's usually a symptom and not a disease. Like it's not the player's fault that they're drawn to these playing styles, but it's still a problem for your game.
Now, let's move on to the really big question. Does story trump rules?
No, it shouldn't. And this is I pointed this exclusively, and people have brought up a lot of good points. So my theory about game mastery is that I'm providing a world for my players to play in. I want them to interact with my constructs. I want them to, and I don't mean just the mechanical constructs. I mean constructs as an ideal. I want them to hate the villain. I want them to know that they have power and autonomy, because that way they can add to my story and that we can all enjoy it. I mean, I think we've all been entertained by players at the table because they felt like they could do the things that they do that makes the game interesting. I think a classic example, I think it was Darkness Rising, right?
Oh, love that movie.
Darkness Rising is a great movie.
Watch it.
Stop.
Pause this.
Yeah.
Go there. Watch it, and then come back.
Yeah, because I'm going to give you some spoilers.
Oh, spoiler alert.
So the game master, who I have an idea was the person who wrote the story behind Darkness Rising, has a party that has failed at this particular campaign a couple times. Right?
About four
times. They've all died doing this thing, and the latest time they died was because they brought a cleric with them, and at the end the cleric had no powers. Turns out there was some stuff that they didn't catch going through. I think that's a great example of bad game design.
I think, using the same example, that was a great choice in game design. It was a nasty surprise because that sets up the big reveal later that the main villain is actually, spoiler alert, the Hierophant that sent them on the quest to get the mask, the MacGuffin they're after, in the first place. The guy has captured the god, so naturally the god isn't going to be able to respond as well as it could. So in that particular case, the minion of the Hierophant, the necromancer there, he's able to tap into that ability to block off the cleric from his god. No one bats an eyelash if it happens to the wizard, except for the wizard.
Oh,
because it happens to the wizard all the time.
Shouldn't happen to the wizard, but they also shouldn't have ridiculous spells.
Right? So there's a balance struck. I think that it gets the player thinking about what else they can do. Yes, you are a person that casts healing magic or divine magic or some kind of holy power. Can you work around it? Can you find a solution to the problem?
Well, the problem is you've taken, let's see, I don't know what level they were. Let's say, for argument's sake, taken a 10th level cleric and you essentially made them a 3rd level NPC who can hit things with a club, and they're not very good at it. They have really good gear, but they're stymied. And
mechanically, I'm talking about flavor, buddy. Flavor. What can that character do besides hit things? They have a whole list of skills that they could tap into. Maybe there's a religion check they can use to figure out what's going on. Maybe there's an arcana check to notice that that magic item right there is glowing kind of ominously. Hint, hint. There's all kinds of different things you could do.
But there's not enough crumbs there for the player to figure it out, which is why they died 4 times. They died 4 times. Who's having fun playing a campaign 4 times when they get murdered? Sadists, no, masochists. Those are the ones.
But that was the first time that they'd run into that problem. Before, they were just not thinking. The examples of these guys throughout the game is a bunch of murder hobos going around killing things, looting things, and not really giving a crap about the story.
The players weren't great people either.
No, they were awful.
But how they figured out the thing that they had to do was through a bardic knowledge check.
And the fresh eyes of a new player who doesn't really think mechanically.
Well, but hiding knowledge like that behind a check that they may or may not pass, that's integral to the story, is a mistake.
It's okay to give hints. You don't want to give it all away, but flavor-wise, you can fudge some stuff. Maybe their check is awful. Okay, what's the next thing you can do? That's why thinking fast on your feet, knowing some improv helps a lot.
Game mastering on a fly is a thing. However, building those structures like that is a mistake. And then, again, coming back to the cleric, not being able to use their spells, all of a sudden you've made a very useful character into a less useful character for practically no reason. For example, maybe I've caught so-and-so, let's say sun goddess, because I like that. The sun goddess's essence, and it's made me super powerful. Why does it have to like cut off this person? I'm not saying that's not a reasonable story. It is. But does it belong in this story, this narrative we're telling between players? Should we stymie the player because we had this great idea? Or should we look for a similar story, the interesting story, the story we want to tell, where the player isn't stymied, but we still get to tell this cool idea? Because frankly, the person handing out the quest, the bishop, was it? Him being the bad guy is a good plot twist. That's a good story. The fact that he's captured his god or some essence of his god, that's a good story. Stymieing a player, I just don't think is necessary.
See, I only think of it as stymieing a player in a small respect. Because again, we're going with mechanics versus the story. And story-wise, there's a whole lot more to that character than what's on that sheet. The player plays them a certain way. If that cleric happens to be some kind of literary scholar of some sort, they can possibly figure out a way around why the MacGuffin is causing them not to be able to touch their god. Sorry, bad terminology. But in the same respect, that player could have been a carpenter from a while back, before they even started. And maybe the structure they're in, there are some spots that are not sound. Maybe they can use that to help out the other players, knock down a pillar or something, hit a weak spot, and just level the playing field a little bit, drop a little bit of ceiling on the massive kobolds that it just came out of the walls, or slow them down at least.
I think that giving the player something to do besides staring at the person and being like, what the heck, it can be a good workaround. I've had many a times with a spellcaster where the spellcaster wasn't able to do anything, but there were NPCs to be rescued, or there because it was like a red dragon and they did fire damage or something like that. But the difference between that and taking away a cleric's player powers is a red dragon has established properties, and you understand those established properties. So then how the game's supposed to work. It gives you a sense of complacency almost. Well, I do these things and this happens. So like taking away the cleric's divine energy, is there, in this case, it was because God was in a crystal. Right?
Yes.
Was there anything pointing to that besides the bardic knowledge?
Anything pointing to that?
That crystal had a god.
Crystal had a god in it.
Besides the bardic knowledge check.
Yes. The entire thing was a setup to give the characters a choice at the end, whether they were rewarded with a wish, and a major NPC was killed. That was part of the story. That was going to happen. That was predetermined. They used the wish to bring back the killed NPC. The whole thing was a setup to get them to make a moral choice that wasn't murder hobery.
Which I like, but getting back to the point, besides the knowledge check, was there anything to say that there was a god in that crystal? That your clericy goodness isn't going to work? Was there any crumbs for the players to pick up on? Because we're not telling a story at that point. We're just stymieing them. However, if there was a 30-foot radius, like, I don't know, like anti-magic field, and there was some anti-magic field runes, and all of a sudden the player can't cast magic, or there's some known mechanic or some way for the the player, not the character, excuse me, the player to understand that this has been taken away for a reason in a way that feels fair, then that same story again can be told.
Well, the mask, the MacGuffin they were after, that has a storied folklore to it. And that was the Bardic Knowledge check. But if you can't make the check, you can still do research on it.
Did they have time to do research?
They could have.
But the way the pace of the story goes, they did. I'm not saying that the supposed game master in this thing is a bad person or that they are a bad game master even. I'm saying how it's laid out makes me believe that those were some poor choices made on his behalf. Maybe the research would reveal this. How would they know to research it? Like, you have to leave all these breadcrumbs all around for the players to find out that, they might be trapping a god and I might lose my stuff, so that if I lose my stuff, then I'm going to have to have something else. So maybe this cleric who had a mace now has some other plan for him to do.
If this entire scenario about the Gamer's Darkness Rising is confusing, head over to the RPG Brigade Facebook. They have a link to the movie up on the site right now.
Regardless of how you feel about flavors or mechanics, it's a great story.
It's so fun to watch.
Again, we're not paid to say anything.
Nothing.
We just like playing games.
But if Dead Gentleman is watching, we are available
to be paid.
And, involved with something.
Look, involved. I like that better.
Handsome. Good enough.
Close enough.
Great.
My beard is getting kind of crazy.
You look like a hobo.
A murder hobo.
A murder hobo.
I can be an adventurer.
I don't like where this is going. That's the kind of look you get right before you get an axe in the head. So
that's where I would put it.
I guess what it comes down to is I like story. He likes mechanics, but we can meet in the middle, because really the point is balance. You got to find balance in the Force, young Skywalker.
It's going to be different for everyone. A couple of people had said before we started this that I'm never going to get everyone to, or we're never going to get everyone to decide on the same things. And that's very true. But that's not the point. Maybe as a game master, you do some things that I say are terrible. Maybe you decide that that this was not a good behavior to have, or maybe you disagree with me, so you start talking with someone else, and then they tell you, well, in my games I do this and this is why. Just generating this sort of discourse where we can discuss and talk about openly how we game master and how we can create better games, because if we all play a game that's more fun, then that's a win.
That's the point right there, kids. The game needs to be fun. If it's not fun, it's not a game. It's a chore. And you don't want to have a chore at the table.
And that means for everyone. Players, game masters, it doesn't matter. Everyone has to be having fun.
If one person at that table isn't having fun, you need to figure out why and how to fix it.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's it for us. I want to thank the RPG Brigade for having us do this little thing. It's been fun.
It has. You can check out Ed's blog at
edthebard at blogspot.com.
You can check out mine. There hasn't been a lot of activity lately. I've been busy, because I work a full-time job and do other things. But it's rpgmechanic.blogspot.com. And
down in the description, there's links to all those and more, including the RPG Brigade website, rpgbrigade.org. And yeah, that's about it.
Be on a lookout for more modules by this guy, and hopefully some interesting stuff from this guy.
I know some of it. It's going to be brutal. So until next time, roll well, my friends.
Keep those games rolling.